even progressing on a journey on the spiritual path, the ego is giving certain preferences even in life. So you would see, you can look at the lives of great sages, of great saints, great yogis, for example. They, even though they were liberated beings, they
Yeah.
still had quite, let's say, individual, unique ways of manifesting a certain preferences.
That's not what we're talking about. I'm not talking
This
about,
is,
I'm
huh?
not, so I know people use this term ego to be all encompassing. I'm not saying that the personality of the human self is the ego, because the personality is the joy of the human experience. I like to be the purity of Alan. I like that Benedict is the purity of Benedict. I
Absolutely.
like that you have a cultural background that's dramatically different from my cultural background that infuses within our personality. You could say that anything that's not of spirit is ego, but in the more classic definition,
I'm not, no, I wouldn't say that. You see that, sorry, interrupting a bit, but
okay,
the, the ego, you see, this is for me also probably maybe something else we can pick up and go in deeper, but the ego itself is not intrinsically bad. You know,
I'm not,
you have to understand it's an energy, and it's like anything else. It's according to its level of refinement and purity.
yeah. So let's throw out the word ego just for a minute, right?
Okay.
You brought up the vibrations of like shame and guilt, right? We would like to think, or we do think, let's see if we agree here, that the vibrations of our true self, like our divine self, our higher self, is just of a high vibration. That our higher self doesn't emanate, doesn't experience guilt or shame, doesn't experience fear,
Absolutely.
right? So when those vibrations emanate from our human self, then we could say that they're only ever experienced as a function of being human. They're coming from something within the human realm.
Hmm. Yes, but I would also say not completely.
Okay. So if you experience shame,
You can experience shame and fear and guilt in the astral realm. That's non-physical.
so you're saying that the higher self, your spiritual self, is emanating shame?
No.
No.
What I'm saying is that as things descend through realms of consciousness from the highest, purest vibration, that
Yeah.
as they descend, let's say, down the scale, those vibrations, it becomes more and more condensed. You see, there's also, you have to also see that even in the human experience, and let's not just talk about what we would term as the negative emotions, but also the positive emotions, love, joy, it's still the I that is identifying with having that experience. We're still not always detached by love. We're not detached by joy. In fact, sometimes we're seeking it, we're grasping it. So that
Yeah.
seeking, grasping element of us is
That's that's a
is
human.
the impurity of what we would call the ego.
So I agree with you there, right? Because spiritual self is just, I mean, it's being experienced. If you think about dropping into, or if you haven't really dropped it, we think that the soul into the body. It's actually the other way around. We're comprised of the light, and the light is all around us. But insofar as we're simply having an experience in form,
Mhm.
you're going to have positive and negative, good and bad experiences, but that's only as seen through the eyes of the human self, which is to
Correct.
say, you're defining an experience as good or bad. You're just, your spiritual self just had the experience. It didn't take on a good or a bad. If the incarnation ends tomorrow, spirit is at peace with its conclusion. But if you ended up getting into a tragic car accident, your friends and family would say, well, that was a terrible ending for Benedict, right? It's the human self that is labeling the experiences as being good or bad. Where I'm orienting the conversation is to say the vibration, we can agree is the vibration being high or low. And if we come back to this concept of Eden, which is a realm that represents spirit in its purity, we
Mhm.
would like to think that Eden is by definition a realm of high vibration.
High vibration, yeah. So you would say that from that perspective, it's beyond the influences of the ego consciousness. You see, the ego consciousness, if we talk about it, exists much more limited in time. The preoccupation of ego consciousness is past or future. The preoccupation, let's say, of higher vibration, let's call it self, higher self, soul, is the present moment.
Right.
And that is actually the Edenic state.
So, and that is that technology that is creating a sequencing of the events to create an illusion of time. That's the function of this technology. That's, I didn't understand it for many, many years. I kept seeing it through identities and ego and the power of now and all the great teachings around it. What they're trying to describe for you is that we're in a realm that's enslaved. And the way that it's enslaved is by creating this ego identity, because man in its purity has since been called out of the state by which we were intended to exist in. And that fall, which is that departure from Eden drawn into temptations, where man took something into his body that was forbidden, has since created a deviation from the intention of our original creation.
Yeah.
And so the understanding of the ego is very valuable, but when you understand that this is deliberate, that this is a realm that has otherwise been captured, and that the war unfolding on planet now is to break away from that technology, to divest of it, to break down the egoic qualities, to raise the vibration so that man can return to a state of greater purity. That's this concept of ascending, which is to say we descended down into low vibrational reality, and now the vibration of the planet is being risen up, and those who can align with it can ascend back into a greater
But you
state.
see, this is also why when people start their spiritual journey, deepen their spiritual awakening, that one of the natural inclinations as the let's say the presence of the higher self becomes more tangible in life, is that there is a return to nature. There is a return to a more natural way of living, a more
Absolutely.
integrated way of living with actually the natural cycles and rhythms of the planet.
Yeah,
So
true.
in a way, you know, the time and the space which we often look at as certain limitations, they're only limitations because of our limited perception of these energies.
Well, and before the fall, for example, before we were called down into a lower vibratory state, we could just materialize here on planet. We would actually come up right through the ground. We could architect an incarnation, assume a body image, because it's just an image. No, it's real, it registers thought, it has its senses, but is being projected as an image in this reality, which is defined by time and space. And insofar as the vibration could be higher, then you could simply materialize as a body image here on planet, experience what it is that the higher self wished to experience, and then dematerialize or continue as a different experience with a different body image.
Yeah. I mean, that's capacities that have been lost. I mean, these are things that people will speak about as paranormal powers because of, as you said, that exactly that limitation that keeps the consciousness trapped within the physical material dimension and the identification with that. So it's a you can almost say it's a hypnotic state actually. And this is why they call it, you know, the sleep of the dead, you know.
They don't realize that they're simply cycling through and that they're being used. Oftentimes, in while informed, they're working because there's productivity that's being desired by their masters. They don't realize it. They're chasing the 10,000 shiny objects, as the Chinese expression goes. And then in the non-physical realm, they're being used as a food source in that state of unconsciousness
Yeah,
because their
I
low
think,
vibrational emanations are also a perfect breeding ground for the interdimensional.
and this again is, I think, another subject really to dig into in another episode because also steps into kind of more, let's say, slightly controversial kind of understandings of things. But again, these are awarenesses, shall we say, of certain controlling, manipulating forces that manifest and embody in various different ways in our physical reality, that actually becoming part of the spiritual awakening really is like you start to observe these things. And this is, when we go back to the spiritual, what does it mean to be on a spiritual journey? Well, fundamentally, it's an altering of your perception upon the apparent reality in which you exist.
That's very good.
And also the capacity to realize that you're not as limited by the physical body as you've been conditioned to believe.
You're not as limited by the human experience as you've been conditioned to believe,
Absolutely.
but that there's many mechanisms that will continue to limit you if you continue to participate in them.
Yeah. And you can see that, again, come back to, various constructs of society, that they're constantly limiting you into an identification with something that's very materialistically orientated and very image centered.
The constant identification is keeping you locked into the separate self or the
Yeah,
egoic self or the slave self, whatever terminology you want to use to describe it. The transcendence of those identities is allowing for the light of your being to stream in and for spirit to carry you to wherever it is that you're intended to go.
because all of these experiences, if not correctly understood, create subtle layers, let's say, around the higher self, subtle veils of ignorance around the higher self that create a wrong identification, so that even when you leave the body, you're so attached to the body that you just want to come back into the body.
Exactly. You don't actually want to leave the body.
Yeah.
You're desperate to hold on, even if your incarnation has largely run its course,
And
because you
that's
have built
because
the
you become
concept of
attached to so many things that you believe you have to do or that you want. And you can see we live in a society that's fueled by desire, fueled actually by temptation.
in construct, as if somebody really thought this one through. So I did want to say that although the insert, it's vibrational, it's not a physical insert because it's an insert into your source connection.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
It's
so, and so similarly, that insert is being reinforced. For example, and I guess we have to be careful with the terminology we use as not to provoke the thought police, but our logo is 2G,
yeah.
right? But there was a technology that was activated not too long ago, and it bathed the planet in a new frequency.
Mhm.
And around the same time, there happened to be an illness which seemed to erupt, spread around the planet. And there are some in the conspiratorial space that have postulated that there was a relationship between that new technology and the prevalence of illness. And
Absolutely.
just, just maybe it was a goldfish in a bowl talking about it at some point. I
Maybe,
don't know.
but I
But
mean, these are
regard,
also,
but
areas I think that are worthy of investigation, because
absolutely. But I say it because if you believe that there is a correlation between those frequencies, which are non-physical, and the physical and the health of the physical body, which is physical, you could see very clearly, and anybody who's not under a rock these days recognizes that the frequencies that are washing over us a huge influence, EMFs and what have you, on our well-being. And so when you understand that the physical body is once again, it's real. This realm is very real. There's no denying that. But that we are an eternal being and that the consciousness or the light of our being, it is physical. It's a different type of materiality. And it goes through a translation as it enters into form. But it experiences its reality very differently, of course, than we do in this dimension. And when you start to recognize that we are largely just these spiritual beings that have come together for a brief experience in form, the more you understand how the frequencies in this realm, and then, of course, the vibrations of the non physical realm have an influence on how you experience your reality, the more your consciousness can blow out, and the choices that you can make can largely sidestep a lot of the peril that is otherwise taking you off your path.
Absolutely. And this is, what was spoken about in the Tantra tradition, the yoga tradition, the Tibetan traditions, about the understanding of the fact that you're not just a physical body, that there are other bodies, there are other energetic layers. And even if we want to not just talk about this from a kind of spiritual perspective, but even from physics, we know that the cells and the atoms and what makes up the physical structure are vibrating with specific frequencies. And therefore, anything that we interact with, either from the outside that is bombarded towards us, or by the emotions and thoughts that we nourish on the inside, are creating vibrations that are impacting upon the predominant vibrational frequency of our energetic field. So
Yeah.
for that functioning of various organs and parts of our body, there are what we would call optimum frequencies of vibration. And if they're interfered with, then without a doubt, there's a problem with health. And this is actually why you can see that with the rapid expansion of humanity and these huge metropolises that are appearing around the world, and the energetic bombardment that exists in those areas, that actually people's health is suffering, and more people, after a certain, shall we say, period of time resisting in there, seek to withdraw, to go to quieter spaces, to go back to the countryside. It's like it becomes almost part of the universal dream. I want a house in the country. The question, why?
Yeah. Because and they feel as if they don't get there, then they're not going to stay for very long.
Exactly.
I mean, you start breaking down in those settings.
You do, yeah, you do, and you can see, and it's like, various psychological phrases are used: burnout, or they talk about now even electro smog and all kinds of things taking place.
Well,
And
you have the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies. You are a composite of those four primary bodies, and each of them need to be nourished in their own ways. And if you're living in a materially driven, low vibrational, toxic environment,
absolutely,
then
it's like thinking of it like a, what to say, like a tank or something, that you fill up with liquids. Um, you're filling it up with low vibrational energy from the bottom. It fills up with oil and sludge, like very heavy elements. It's going to affect your structure. If you're not compensating that by bringing into your life also other good, counterbalancing, lighter, higher vibrational energies, which are actually related to your higher emotions, your beneficial thoughts,
yeah,
the spiritual awareness of life, which then create a counterbalance, because we exist in this human experience in duality. So therefore, for balance and harmony to coexist, if there's a lot of toxins coming towards us, we have to spend a lot of time detoxifying one way or another.
yeah, on each of those levels. Like, you have to care for the physical body because it's being
Absolutely.
bombarded with toxicity. Those toxicities actually, which are endless, people can understand them most easily. Like, people can get a grasp of
They
sprayed
become,
all over their crops, for example, or
yeah,
animals that are being brutalized in factory farming. But then the mental aspect of it is a little bit more complicated, because the people around you, if they're unhealthy, their mental health becomes a function and otherwise projected into your mental well-being on a
Hmm.
vibrational level or a very
Hmm.
practical level.
Yeah,
Then you go past the mental, and of course, the emotional then becomes an extension of that. And then once you get into the spiritual, if you're not nurturing your spiritual health with some form of daily practice or at least a focus and understanding that you are ultimately on a spiritual path, that spiritual aspect can be very undercatered to very quickly. And that's the fourth leg of your chair.
absolutely. And this is actually the fundamental principles that underpinned the tradition of the yoga practice. The yoga practice was built around exactly this, nourishing the physical body and nourishing the emotional body, nourishing the thoughts and the consciousness, and nourishing the spiritual body.
Awesome.
So, you would have your practice, it's like yoga practice now, the asanas, the keep fit side of it's super, how to say, popularized, but it's
Yeah,
popularized just in taking care of that one leg.
yeah, truly.
Whereas when you looked at the authentic spiritual practice and the spiritual teachers and the teachings and how they spoke about, it was you took the one leg, you took the body, you be through the practices in the body becoming greater awareness into kind of the emotional health, into what's termed modernly the mental health, and then also ultimately becoming aware actually of your spiritual nature. So this
Yeah.
would, come back to also what in the Indian tradition, is referred to the ideas of artha, which is taking care of your needs in the material world, kama, which is taking care of your need for pleasure and enjoyment of life. And then you would have your dharma, which is basically doing your duty and your responsibility in life so that
Perfect.
you could achieve moksha, which was liberation. So basically reconnecting to your higher self, to your revealing the self, or the self-realization as it's spoken about. Now, what's fascinating for me is that you see that with the increasing toxicity over the past 40 years within the societal structures and the city structures and technology and businesses and various advent of more and more mobile frequencies, that people have become, one of the things that first started to dominate was a greater awareness on physical health and diet. There's more and more people much more conscious now than they were 40, 50 years ago.
Had to be.
Have to be, because, but
A lot more disease than there was 40 or 50 years ago.
yeah,
Outright disease. I mean, forget about, adult disease, but childhood. I mean, you look at the US, how 50% of all US kids now are carrying either extra weight or some type of illness. Half of the country.
yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a question there about, I mean, in some ways, life expectancy is longer, quality of life is better, and various things. But I think what's really gone missing is that to such a degree, in a way, that they've created a false comfort, which again, coming back to the technology that's keeping people in the lower vibration, they've created an economy and society that makes it very, very easy for you to make the wrong choices and the bad choices. And actually, they promote and encourage that a lot.
Of course, it's being promoted. And I wouldn't say quality of life is better because people aren't registering as happier or healthier. The standard of living has gone up, which is
Standard of living, yeah.
more consumption and more access to more of the goods. But the overall quality of life has been diminishing for much of the Western world now for quite some time. I think it's only Bhutan that has like a happiness index as its primary focus. Most of the world just focuses on economic might, not on
Mhm.
actual quality
Yeah.
of life or happiness. But most people would tell you, especially earlier generations, there's higher levels of anxiety and depression, and people are more and more disconnected from their communities and each other. There's a loneliness epidemic in Japan and other Asian countries. It's incredible how, as we pursued just the material, we've suffered in the emotional.
Yeah,
And,
the material,
and
the technological is actually rather than, and on some degrees, has made it easier for us to connect, but actually made us more disconnected.
yeah, ironically, that you don't value the connections quite the same way you used to.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
trivial.
It's a lot. It encourages that superficial, incorrect perception and identification with life, which, coming back to what does it mean to be on a spiritual journey, you start to see that, and this is one of the big things you see in society, actually, the way that society is constructed is there isn't a large degree of self-responsibility,
I have this conversation often.
you know.
This
I
conversation with
mean,
someone
and
very dear to me.
it's sad to say, but you know, the American culture is how to say the epitome of this, of, you know, just pump yourself full of junk food and rubbish, and then expect some hospital to pump you full of pills or
And
do
fix it.
the, you know, give you the medication, the operation you need, and then you just go out and repeat it all over again.
So I ask you, and maybe this is a good, maybe this is a good point. We can end. There's so many other conversational outlets that have shown up through our conversation on the spiritual. But do you believe that that destination for like an entire country, for example, where it's arrived at this place of abject disconnect and unhealthy, seamlessly endless consuming behavior, where it's
You know,
just focused on more, right? It's just more, more, more. Do you believe that that's the natural evolution of humanity, or do you believe that there is more of a force at play that has guided humanity down that path?
it's a fascinating question because if you were to talk about, shall we say, what country do people think is the most, shall we say, almost materialistic power, financial, um, obese country? Um, I think if you asked a lot of the world, they would say, well, America, right? And it's a fascinating thing, and this would be a topic also for another episode. What was America built upon? America was built upon greed.
Well,
It,
yeah,
it
sure,
was
but
built upon greed because it was built upon the gold rush. I'm saying it like that. So it's a fascinating thing to see that if you the primary
motivated.
okay, there was a certain in the beginning there was a certain thing of freedom, creating a New England, let's say, as it was the whole. But after that, the Wild West and everything, and all the things that happened out there, was very much built upon everybody. The great everybody will be wealthy. There is gold in the hills. Go out there and stake your claim. And
But that, there's a lot of folklore around that. The actual number of Americans that actively participate in the gold rush, and then the number that actually made any money from it, it's
absolutely, but you see exactly those kind of schemes still
yeah,
exist in modern, you know, as they call them, Ponzi schemes, exist in modern society, and
I
most of them
know, but
originate from where?
look at there's an overweight and obesity problem in England, and it's been creeping onto continental Europe,
Absolutely.
going up
Yeah.
all through anywhere where there is a mechanical or mechanized food supply. Anywhere
Yeah,
where
my point was, I wasn't just limiting it to America because it's quite clear that when we talk about the lower frequencies and vibrations and what's promoted, greed has become very predominantly
no,
promoted.
no doubt. So
It's just for me, it was a fascinating observation that in a way, the energy that's associated with the beginnings of America was very much how true or not it is, and how many people succeeded, and yada yada yada. But it is one of, let's say, one of the intrinsic characteristics that you would associate with the building of America.
fair enough. So what was the vibration behind the British Empire?
The same, right? Greed, conquer and greed, and you can see it's
Power, control,
power. Yeah, it's
and
again, and it's a certain level of consciousness that's very much associated with going beyond the simple survival needs, the simple instinctual pleasure needs. Afterwards, what do you want? You want power. You want purpose. You need it's a need to have something, you know. And again, and it's that thing again with the Commonwealth, the British misconstrued. Now, this is a whole other subject that maybe we park right now for something else, but
so
what's interesting from the spiritual perspective is the fact that when you start to become aware of the energies behind certain manifestations, you become aware, your perception of reality starts to change. And you actually realize that, and come back to the famous quote of Gandhi, that be the change you want to see in the world is really almost like the first mantra of being on the spiritual path.
Yeah, it starts with self.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You know,
you have to be the
so
Lord.
your transformation, your steps on the spiritual journey are your responsibility.
Yeah, so I don't know that you gave me a direct answer. So do you believe that it's the nature of humans to have moved down this path to have arrived at where we lived, or do you believe that there is another force at play which has worked quite diligently, painstakingly to move humanity down this path at
By down this
because
path, you mean towards the process of awakening and ascension?
no, down the path of the to have brought us to where we are now.
Well, I would say that there are two opposing forces. One that's pulling towards darkness and negativity, and one that's calling us back towards, shall we say, Edenic consciousness and our, how to say, our godly origins. And these are two opposing forces apparently in this level of consciousness. These are two opposing forces because
That's great.
and 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 they have to almost coexist. Otherwise, there's no choice, or there's no apparent choice even.
Our choice. Yeah, no, it is a realm of choice. It certainly is. I don't think most in their unconscious state realize that they're invoking choice every day.
This is, what we come back to with health and things. It's, you can see that spiritual awakening actually is realizing that as companies and profit margins and food quality became secondary, right? Or some profit margins, let's say, didn't become secondary. Profit margins became increasingly important, whereas food quality that you buy in most supermarkets is lessened and lessened and lessened. They became a certain awakening actually of the importance of good nutrition and quality food,
Yeah, it's a
which in the olden days, because there wasn't so many mass productions of food and certainly not so much processed food, even just going back a couple of generations, people were still growing their own food. It was all natural. You didn't have all of the additives. So even in a way, some of the difficulties, which of course you can see trap a lot of people into the negative cycles of health and physical, emotional, let's say mental problems. On the other hand, for a lot of people, it reaches a point where you go, hang on, this is enough. This is not good for my structure. This is not good for my state of being.
and then they try to figure out just how deep that rabbit's hole really goes.
Yeah,
And they
yeah,
start to look at not just their food supply, but the water that they're drinking and wondering why there's something being added to their water. They start to look at all the various medications that they're taking, the things that they may be injecting into their bodies or their children's bodies.
absolutely. And this is one of the inherent paradoxes of being on a spiritual journey, that even what seems to be bad serves a purpose because it gives you a chance to say no to that and choose something better.
I appreciate that too.
You know,
I oftentimes see the suffering that comes with that decision. And so I'm very compassionate and wishing that it was different, but I recognize how they go hand in hand.
yeah,
I will add one last statistic and then maybe I think we can wrap up because otherwise we're going to run into the next subject matter. I think we probably already have, but did you know that the Americans only spend half as much on food as the Europeans, but they spend 3 times as much on healthcare?
really, okay.
So
That's an interesting statistic, but then I guess again,
it makes
finance
sense.
wide, okay, but
So food,
quality
food,
of food,
well, that's just it. So food is twice as expensive in Europe, but Americans end up spending 3 times more to care for themselves as a result.
yeah.
So it's pay for it now or pay for it later. Would you rather pay more for food and have a healthy body or pay less for food and then wind up sick?
and I think to conclude it and frame the question, what does it mean to be on a spiritual journey? Actually, the first part of being on the spiritual journey is actually encountering those situations in life where you realize that your happiness and fulfillment in life is somehow being compromised and being put face to face with a choice to try and improve it. And you can see that, as I said before,
It's the first step.
the
Absolutely.
first step's been the physical body, the health, the food, which is obviously developed into the areas of emotional health, mental health.
That's it. Awakening to your reality and seeing it clearly for what it is the first step on a spiritual journey. As you move down that path, eventually you're more devoted to the inward journey because you see that a lot of the imbalances are coming from within you.
Exactly.
From like
I mean,
emotional
part of that also is taking that personal responsibility, because suddenly you see that to not take the easy choice of just going down to the local 7-Eleven or spa or whatever, and just grabbing the nearest, well, processed food off the shelf, actually to go shopping more consciously and buy much more fresh and organic and food that's of a vibration that's actually supporting your energetic structures and your higher vibration, is actually much more difficult to do than just going grabbing a basket full of junk
and
at a
just
local
indulging.
supermarket.
Well, so that's it. So if you're emotional eating, for example, and you're going through a difficult day and you run down to the market and grab a tub of ice cream,
Yeah.
you could awaken and say, it's dirty dairy. It's maybe affecting my glycemic. It has all sorts of consequences. I don't want to indulge on something that's so unhealthy. But at some point in your journey, you're also going to say, why am I emotionally eating? Why am I driven into
Yeah.
these comfort foods when I have a tough day?
Why do I feel sick after eating this? Why? Yeah, exactly. All of this
What's
stuff.
the
Has
what's
it
the
actually done me any good?
what's the emotional imbalance resident within me that has me moving down this path of indulging in these otherwise unhealthy foods to begin?
And you can see, actually, that is what does it mean to be on a spiritual journey? Increasing self-awareness that leads to better choices and actually fundamentally leads you towards better quality of life.
Good. It only took us an hour, but we got there.
That's good.
All right, my friend. I think it's a good point to conclude. As
I
always,
think this is a good point to conclude. And of course, if anybody has anything they want to add in the comments when this is posted, or any other subjects that we touched on, because we touched on a lot of subjects, and for sure we will cover them in the future and uncover many more subjects. But if people have anything specific they want to talk to, or maybe some areas of this talk today that we didn't touch on in enough detail that they want us to maybe explore a bit more, then we're welcome to take them in the comments.
comments. At some point, maybe we'll give out our email address. They can communicate with us directly as well. Maybe, I don't know. But we'll start with comments.
We'll figure it all out.
All right, Benedict.
All right, Alan, it's been a pleasure.
Have a beautiful day. I look forward to our next chat.